There are women whose love is so quiet it is almost invisible, yet their sacrifices are louder than thunder in the heavens. Jennifer was one of such women. In the heart of Lagos, in a modest two-bedroom flat with peeling paint and creaking doors, she carried the weight of two destinies, her husband's and her own, upon her fragile shoulders. By day, she taught children in a local school, her voice tender yet firm, shaping minds too young to know the depth of her weariness. By night, she burned candles into the lonely hours, tutoring extra classes just to scrape together enough naira to keep their dreams afloat. When Samuel, her husband, spoke of his desire for an MBA that would set him apart in the corporate world, Jennifer did not question the impossibility of the tuition. Instead, she pawned her jewelry, gifts from her late mother, each trinket carrying a memory, each memory exchanged for his tomorrow. She skipped meals, wrapped her own hunger in smiles, and told him, "Eat, my love. You need your strength for the exams." Samuel never truly saw her sacrifices. He only saw the end goal, a crown that would one day sit upon his head. But even the heavens take notice of tears shed in silence, and Jennifer's quiet endurance did not go unnoticed by the God she prayed to each night. Kneeling beside their worn-out bed, she whispered prayers for Samuel's success, never once asking heaven for herself. She imagined the day he would graduate, suited in dignity, standing tall, because she had been his ladder. Her students often laughed at how she stared dreamily out of the classroom window, but what they did not know was that she was seeing a future not for herself, but for the man she loved beyond reason. Her body grew leaner, her eyes carried shadows, yet her heart overflowed with loyalty. She was content to be the unsung hymn in Samuel's story, believing that one day he would sing of her sacrifices with gratitude. But men drunk on ambition seldom pause to honor the wells from which they drank. Samuel passed his MBA with flying colors, and the congratulations rained down upon him. At the graduation, guests surrounded him, shaking his hand, praising his brilliance. Jennifer, standing at the back of the hall with a borrowed gown that smelled faintly of mothballs, clapped until her palm stung. Her smile was wide, her pride genuine. She thought herself the luckiest woman alive, for had she not been the wind beneath his wings? She imagined that from this point, their love would grow stronger, their burdens lighter. But destiny had already begun to write another script, one in which her sacrifices would become invisible ink, erased by the shine of another woman's wealth and glamour. Success is a cruel master. It sharpens desire until a man no longer recognizes the hand that fed him. Samuel, armed with his MBA, stepped boldly into the real estate firm where he worked. The bosses noticed him, the clients admired his wit, and soon, his name whispered in boardrooms with promise. But it was not just the firm that noticed him. Patricia, the only daughter of Chief Adeyemi, the firm's wealthy founder, cast her eyes upon him like a lioness spotting prey. She was a vision of Lagos wealth, tall, elegantly dressed in imported gowns, her skin polished, her fingers heavy with rings that glittered like promises of paradise. She spoke with an accent molded abroad, her laughter loud, her presence commanding. To Samuel, who had spent years in the quiet presence of Jennifer's humility, Patricia was intoxicating. She leaned close when she spoke, praised his ideas in meetings, and once brushed her hand against his, as though by accident. It was enough to set fire to the dry leaves of his ambition. At home, Jennifer still greeted him with bowls of steaming egusi soup, with soft words of encouragement, with eyes that saw him not as an executive, but as her husband, her companion. Yet Samuel grew restless in her presence. The simple wrappers she wore, the modest headscarves, the way she saved every naira and recycled old shoes, suddenly, these became thorns in his eyes. Beside Patricia's lavish perfumes and glittering cars, Jennifer seemed too small, too plain, too ordinary. He began to compare, though he never spoke it aloud. Patricia's conversations dripped with connections and possibilities, while Jennifer's revolved around classrooms and children. In his heart, a seed of contempt began to grow, watered daily by Patricia's calculated charm. One evening after a late board meeting, Patricia invited Samuel to ride in her sleek black Range Rover. The city lights bounced off the tinted windows as she leaned closer, her perfume filling the air, her laughter warm against his ears. She whispered, "You're destined for more, Samuel. Don't let anyone hold you back." The words struck deep, echoing in the caverns of his restless ambition. That night, he returned home to find Jennifer asleep at the table, her head resting on stacks of exercise books she had been marking for her students. A candle burned low beside her, the wax dripping like her unseen sacrifices. Samuel looked at her, but instead of gratitude, all he felt was irritation. In that moment, the scales tipped, and the woman who had carried him began to fade into the shadows of his desire for power. It began with whispers, subtle and dangerous. Patricia was skilled in the art of seduction, not by force, but by suggestion. A compliment here, a lingering glance there, the gentle brushing of her fingers when papers exchanged hands. Samuel, though at first resistant, began to yield. It was not that he loved Patricia. It was that she represented a world he craved. Wealth without waiting, influence without struggle, power without sacrifice. He started to linger in the office even after the work was done, waiting for those private moments when she would draw close and speak into his ear like a siren luring a sailor to the rocks. One evening, she invited him to her apartment under the guise of discussing a confidential project. The air between them was thick with unspoken promises. Samuel betrayed his vows that night, though in his heart he excused it as destiny unfolding. Jennifer noticed the change, as women often do. The late nights became too frequent, the excuses too rehearsed, the scent of another woman's, perfume sometimes clinging faintly to his shirts. She asked softly, "Samuel, are you drifting for me?" He denied it, his tone sharp, his eyes avoiding hers. He grew irritated by her questions, as though her concern was a burden he could no longer carry. She continued to cook his meals, continued to pray for him, continued to hold onto the fragile hope that her husband would remember the vows they made. But Samuel was already gone, his heart tethered to another altar. Patricia, intoxicated by her triumph, began to flaunt their closeness in subtle ways within the company. A laugh shared too long, a knowing glance during meetings, a touch that lingered longer than professionalism allowed. Rumors began to swirl, and though no one confronted them directly, Jennifer's dignity began to drown in whispers she never heard. Samuel did not care. In his mind, Jennifer belonged to the chapter of his life he had already outgrown. He began to think not of how to mend his marriage, but how to end it. And so the betrayal that started in secret prepared itself to stand in the open, with papers and signatures that would shatter Jennifer's world. The evening was heavy with the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Jennifer had prepared Samuel's favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken, seasoned just the way he liked it, the aroma filling the small apartment with warmth. She set the table, lit a candle, and prayed silently that this dinner would bridge the growing distance between them. But when Samuel returned, his face carried none of the gratitude she hoped for. His eyes were cold, his lips pressed into a thin line. He sat not to eat, but to deliver a verdict that would cut deeper than any blade. From his briefcase, he pulled out a neat stack of papers, slid them across the table, and said flatly, "Sign these. I want a divorce." The words hit Jennifer like thunder in a cloudless sky. She stared at the papers, her hands trembling, her throat tightening, the candlelight flickering against her pale, shocked face. Her first instinct was disbelief. This man, for whom she had bled her sacrifices, whose future she had carried as her own, was dismissing her with ink and paper? Her mind raced with memories, nights of hunger endured so he could eat, mornings of exhaustion pushed aside so he could study, prayers whispered when he doubted himself. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "what have I done to deserve this?" But Samuel, drunk on pride and Patricia's influence, avoided her eyes. "You're not the woman for my future," he said, each word colder than the last. His voice was sharp, decisive, leaving no room for argument. Jennifer felt her world tilt, her heart tearing in ways she did not know were possible. Tears pricked her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. That night, she did not touch the food she had prepared. She sat staring at the papers long after Samuel had gone to bed, her mind torn between love and betrayal. With trembling hands, she touched the pen, knowing that to sign was to bury the years she had invested, yet to refuse was to cling to a man who had already abandoned her heart. At dawn, she knelt beside her bed, her knees pressing into the cold floor, her tears flowing freely for the first time. She prayed not for her marriage to be restored, but for the strength to endure the valley before her. When the sun rose, she signed the papers. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was louder than thunder in her soul, and with that signature, she sealed her pain. The day she left their home was quiet, almost deceptively so. Jennifer packed her belongings into a small bag, just enough clothes to carry her through, her mother's faded Bible, and the memories of a marriage that once felt like a sanctuary. She left behind the wedding photos on the wall, the neatly arranged dishes, the carefully folded sheets that bore the scent of shared nights, now turned cold. As she stood in the doorway, she looked back once, her eyes tracing the space that had been filled with laughter, struggle, and love. But the man who once promised forever had turned his back, so she stepped out into the morning sun with nothing but dignity to cloak her. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers trailing her like shadows. Samuel has left her, some said with pity, others with mockery. But Jennifer kept walking, her steps slow yet steady, her head bowed, but her spirit unbroken. Samuel, meanwhile, stood proudly at Patricia's side, parading her like a trophy. They attended company functions together, their photographs appearing in lifestyle magazines, their names whispered in awe. To him, Jennifer had become a relic of his past, a reminder of a life too small for the heights he aspired to reach. He did not see her tears, did not hear her prayers, did not feel the cold nights she endured in her new one-room rented apartment. To Samuel, it was as though she never existed. Patricia, with her painted lips and sparkling jewelry, filled his vision completely. And so, while Jennifer struggled to rebuild her life, Samuel basked in borrowed glory, blind to the storm gathering in the distance. Jennifer, though wounded, refused to be crushed. She found work closer to her school, poured herself into her teaching, and slowly began to rebuild. At night, when loneliness pressed against her chest, she turned to her Bible, whispering psalms into the darkness. She discovered a strength she did not know she carried, a strength not loud or vengeful, but quiet, like roots pushing through stone. Though abandoned and mocked, she held on to her dignity, believing that one day, the God who saw in secret would reward openly. Little did she know that the very stage upon which Samuel flaunted his pride would soon become the place of his greatest humiliation, and that the woman he discarded would stand as a witness to his downfall. The city of Lagos buzzed with anticipation. For Patricia Adeyemi's wedding was not just a union. It was a social event to be carved into the annals of the elite. Newspapers splashed her name across glossy pages. Radio stations hummed with speculation, and fashion designers whispered eagerly about who would design her gown. Samuel walked through this whirlwind of preparation like a man ascending into royalty. For the first time in his life, chauffeurs held car doors open for him, photographers scrambled for his picture, and men twice his age shook his hand with calculated respect. He was no longer Samuel, the son of a struggling family from Ibadan. He was Samuel, the man about to marry into the Adeyemi empire. Patricia orchestrated everything with her father's money and her mother's pride. She picked a venue gilded with chandeliers imported from Italy, ordered champagne from France, and made sure every flower was flown in from Dubai. Samuel smiled at the spectacle, blind to the emptiness behind it, believing himself the protagonist of a fairy tale where poverty was defeated and power was finally his inheritance. In the midst of this grandeur, Jennifer's world was a stark contrast. In her one-room apartment, she stretched her meager salary to cover rent and food, keeping her dignity intact though the nights grew colder. The walls were bare, her clothes simple, but her heart was steadier than before. She taught children with renewed passion, determined not to let her personal sorrow spill into their laughter. Her colleagues noticed her quiet strength, the way she never faltered even when the world expected her to break. Sometimes at night, she would hear the echoes of wedding announcements on the radio, Patricia and Samuel's names rolling across the airwaves with such fanfare that neighbors would rush to their radios to listen. Jennifer would pause, her hand still on her Bible, and whisper, "Lord, let me not envy them. Give me peace." Though her heart stung with betrayal, she clothed herself in resilience, unseen but powerful. The wedding preparations swelled like a drumbeat, gathering momentum. Every magazine painted Samuel as the luckiest man alive, chosen by fate to ascend into wealth. He basked in this glory, forgetting the woman who had sold her gold chain so he could pay his MBA tuition, forgetting the nights she sat marking exercise books while he slept, forgetting the sacrifices woven like invisible threads into his destiny. To him, Jennifer was an old story, and Patricia was the chapter that mattered. Yet in the unseen corridors of fate, threads were being woven. The louder Samuel celebrated his rising sun, the closer came the shadow that would eclipse it. It was late, one of those nights when Lagos seemed quieter, when even the traffic held its breath. Jennifer sat marking exercise books under the dim glow of her lamp when she heard a knock on her door. Her heart skipped, for the sound was firm and familiar. Opening the door, she saw Samuel, dressed in a crisp suit, his cologne sharp, his shoes polished like mirrors. For a moment, her heart faltered, memories rushing back, but his eyes carried no tenderness, only pride. He stepped inside uninvited, glanced around her modest room with thinly veiled disdain, and smirked. "So this is where you live now?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Jennifer said nothing. She simply gestured for him to sit, though she did not sit herself. His presence turned the small room heavy, the air thick with unspoken history. Samuel leaned back, legs crossed, and began to talk, not of regret, not of apology, but of triumph. He spoke of Patricia, of the wedding preparations, of the opportunities now flowing his way. "Jennifer," he said, with arrogance coating each syllable, "you should see what I've become. Everything I dreamed of is within reach now." His eyes gleamed, his smile wide, as though expecting her to weep, to plead, to regret letting him go. But Jennifer stood quietly, her hands folded before her face calm though her chest burned with pain. "I wish you well," she said softly, her voice steady, almost detached. For a moment, Samuel faltered, his pride pricked by her composure. He had come to gloat, to prove to himself that she was broken without him. Instead, he found her standing like a tree rooted in unseen waters. When he left, the room felt lighter, though Jennifer's heart was bruised anew. She closed the door and sank to her knees beside her bed, tears streaming freely now. "Lord," she prayed, her voice shaking, "give me strength not to hate him. Teach me to forgive even when it hurts." Her tears fell onto the wooden floor, each one a testament of love betrayed, yet dignity preserved. Outside, Samuel slid into Patricia's waiting Range Rover, feeling powerful, not realizing that the very arrogance that fueled him was planting seeds of his downfall. For God has a way of lifting the lowly and humbling the proud. Success attracts not only envy, but also warnings. One afternoon, after a board meeting, Samuel was approached by Mr. Okoro, an elderly manager who had worked under Chief Adeyemi for decades. His hair was gray, his back slightly bent, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of experience. "Samuel," he said gravely, "a word of advice. Patricia is not what she seems. Be careful." Samuel laughed it off, brushing aside the words as jealousy. "She is my future, sir," he replied with pride. But Mr. Okoro's face did not soften. "You see only the gold, not the rot beneath it. Patricia's last engagement nearly ruined this company. She hides things you may not survive." His words hung heavy, like thunderclouds gathering. Samuel pretended not to hear, but a small part of his heart trembled. Yet ambition has a way of silencing caution. That night, as he dined with Patricia in a restaurant where chandeliers sparkled like stars and violins played softly, Samuel looked into her eyes and dismissed every doubt. She was flawless, her laughter intoxicating, her promises like honey dripping into his ears. "Don't listen to old men," Patricia whispered, sensing his distraction. "They envy what we have. Together, we will own the future." Samuel nodded, drinking deeply from her words, ignoring the shadows creeping at the edges of his conscience. He had chosen his path, blind to the pitfalls ahead. Meanwhile, Jennifer's path was being quietly lit. She began receiving recognition for her work at the school. Parents praised her, children adored her, and her principal began to entrust her with more responsibilities. Though she walked through loneliness, she was not abandoned. Providence was weaving a tapestry for her, one that would shine brighter in the end than the chandeliers of Patricia's banquet halls. As Samuel dismissed warnings and embraced deceit, Jennifer embraced truth, patience, and resilience. Two roads stretched apart, one glittering but dangerous, the other humble but blessed. The world watched Samuel, but heaven watched Jennifer. Patricia was a woman of masks. To the world, she was flawless, a jewel polished by wealth, the perfect daughter of a titan, the prize every man desired. But behind the mask lurked shadows she kept hidden even from Samuel. She had been engaged once before to Chike, a powerful oil magnate from Port Harcourt. Their relationship was stormy, marked by luxury and betrayal. It ended in scandal, hushed up by Chief Adeyemi's influence and money. But what the world did not know was that Patricia and Chike never truly severed ties. Late at night, while Samuel slept, she still whispered on the phone to Chike, their conversations laced with secrets too dangerous to surface. And the child growing in her womb? It was Chike's. She carried the secret like perfume on her skin, hidden, but strong enough to eventually be noticed. Samuel, oblivious, basked in the glow of his rising profile. He strutted through the company like a man who had conquered destiny. He paraded Patricia with pride, never once suspecting that the very foundation of their union was a lie. Patricia, skilled at manipulation, kept him close with tender words and promises of empire. She let him believe the child was his, watching with hidden amusement as he spoke of becoming a father. Her father, Chief Adeyemi, too eager to secure his legacy, ignored the inconsistencies, pushing for the wedding to happen quickly, before whispers could grow into storms. The stage was set, but it was set on a fault line waiting to split open. Far away from their glittering world, Jennifer began to feel a shift in her spirit. Though she knew nothing of Patricia's secret, she sensed that Samuel's new world was not built on truth. She prayed quietly, "Lord, reveal what is hidden in darkness." In her heart a peace settled, as though heaven whispered back, "Be still, for I will fight for you." And so, while Patricia buried her secrets beneath silks and diamonds, and Samuel strutted in pride, Jennifer waited in quiet strength, her dignity unshaken. While Lagos society fixated on Patricia's upcoming wedding, another story was unfolding in quieter corners of the city. Jennifer, once cast aside and mocked, was rising. Her dedication at the school did not go unnoticed. She spent hours mentoring students, not just in academics, but in life. She taught them about resilience, about choosing integrity over shortcuts, about faith in the unseen. Parents began to request her specifically for their children, praising her patience and wisdom. The school board, impressed by her tireless devotion, promoted her to acting headmistress. For the first time since Samuel's betrayal, Jennifer's name was being spoken not in pity, but in respect. Her modest one-room apartment, once a symbol of her fall, began to feel like a sanctuary. She decorated it with little touches of joy, a vase of flowers on the table, neatly pressed curtains, her mother's Bible placed where sunlight could fall upon it each morning. She no longer listened to the whispers of neighbors with shame. Instead, she walked with her head high, her steps steady. She had been abandoned, yes, but she was not defeated. Her spirit glowed quietly, a light that could not be hidden. Unknown to her, even those who once mocked her began to admire her strength, though they would not admit it aloud. Meanwhile, Samuel heard of her promotion through mutual acquaintances. It unsettled him. In the privacy of his thoughts, he wondered how she had managed to rise when he expected her to sink. But pride choked any lingering affection, and he brushed the thought aside. Still, a seed of unease began to form. For fate has a way of exalting those despised and humbling those exalted. As Jennifer's star began to glow brighter, Samuel's own would soon begin its descent, faster and more violently than he could ever imagine. The sun rose on Lagos with a brilliance that seemed to announce the day's grandeur. From Victoria Island to Lekki, the city buzzed with whispers of one event: Patricia Adeyemi's wedding to Samuel, the lucky groom. Convoys of sleek cars began to stream toward the cathedral, each vehicle carrying men and women dressed in the richest attires, geli wrapped high like crowns, agbada flowing like royal robes. The venue, adorned with roses flown in from Dubai and chandeliers imported from Italy, glistened as though heaven itself had stooped to watch. Samuel arrived in a convoy fit for a prince, stepping out in a white embroidered agbada, his wrist heavy with gold, his face shining with the pride of a man who believed he had conquered destiny. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled, and whispers rippled. He used to be ordinary, but look at him now. He is marrying into power. Samuel smiled broadly, his chest swelling as Patricia descended from her Rolls Royce, radiant in a gown laced with diamonds, her father's arm proudly holding hers. Together, they walked through the aisle, the sound of drums, violins, and voices blending in a chorus that seemed to baptize their union in glory. But not all glories are born of truth. Within the cathedral, the air was thick with expectation. Guests adjusted their seats, murmurs of admiration filling every corner. Chief Adeyemi stood tall, his pride painted across his stern face, while Samuel's relatives, dressed in their best, looked around with awe, overwhelmed by wealth they had never known. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension pulsed like an underground river. Patricia's eyes darted occasionally, betraying unease, though she masked it with smiles. Samuel, oblivious, strutted down the aisle like a king, never once remembering the woman who had stitched his shirts when he could not afford a tailor, or sold her gold chain to pay for his MBA. For him, this day was proof that leaving Jennifer had been the right choice. He whispered to himself, "Today I step into destiny." Little did he know, destiny had sharpened its blade and was waiting in the shadows to strike. As the ceremony began, the pastor's voice rang clear, his words echoing through the cathedral. Samuel's heart beat fast, not with love, but with triumph. He looked out at the sea of dignitaries, politicians, and business magnates who had come to witness the union. He imagined doors of influence opening, contracts falling into his lap, fortunes flowing toward him. To him, the wedding was not about love, but about empire. Patricia smiled beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her father's eyes burning with pride. The choir sang hymns that rose to the heavens, but even heaven seemed to pause, watching the stage with silent judgment. For though men had gathered to celebrate, the author of truth was preparing to unmask lies, and the wedding of the year was about to become the scandal of the century. The vows began. Samuel's voice trembled slightly as he repeated after the pastor, but the tremble was not from humility. It was from the weight of pride pressing his chest. He glanced at Patricia, whose smile was as polished as the diamonds on her neck. Her eyes, bright though shadows, lingered at the corners. Guests leaned forward eagerly, savoring every word, some nodding with approval, others whispering of the wealth this union represented. The air was thick, almost suffocating, filled with perfumes, expectations, and the unseen tension of secrets buried too deep. Samuel believed himself untouchable in this moment, surrounded by power, celebrated by the rich. He smiled faintly as the pastor's voice reached the age-old line, "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined, speak now, or forever hold your peace." A hush fell over the cathedral, sudden and heavy. The silence stretched like a bow pulled taut. Guests shifted in their seats, glancing around nervously, waiting for the brief pause to pass. Patricia's hand tightened slightly on Samuel's, her nails pressing into his skin, betraying a flicker of anxiety. Samuel's chest swelled with arrogance. He smirked, thinking, no one would dare. Not today, not here. The pastor's eyes scanned the hall, and for a moment it seemed the silence would hold, that the wedding would proceed without interruption. The choir adjusted their sheets, ready to sing the next hymn. Chief Adeyemi leaned back, his lips curving into a proud smile. The tension began to ease, replaced by murmurs of relief. But heaven has a way of tearing open what men try to hide. Just as the pastor prepared to continue, a sound broke through the silence, a loud creak of the cathedral doors swinging open. The sound echoed across the marble floor, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the hush like a knife. Heads turned, necks craned, and whispers erupted as the guests stared toward the back. Patricia's smile faltered, her grip tightening painfully on Samuel's arm. His smirk froze, his heart suddenly pounding as a shadow appeared in the doorway. The air grew heavier, the silence returning, but this time charged with dread. Something, or someone, was about to shatter the perfect illusion. All eyes turned to the entrance, and there she was, Jennifer. She walked in slowly, her steps measured, her presence commanding though her attire was modest compared to the jeweled gowns around her. She wore a simple but elegant blue gown, her natural hair tied neatly in a bun, her face glowing not with makeup but with dignity. Gasps filled the cathedral. Whispers raced like wildfire. "Isn't that his ex-wife? What is she doing here?" Samuel's throat tightened. His palms began to sweat. He had imagined Jennifer broken, hidden away in shame, but here she was, standing tall, her eyes calm, her aura unshaken. She was not here to beg, nor to cry. She was here as though heaven itself had summoned her to bear witness. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing a storm. Patricia's face turned pale, her smile vanishing. She whispered urgently to Samuel, "Do something." But Samuel was paralyzed, his pride shattering as Jennifer's calm presence filled the hall. Step by step, she walked down the aisle, her heels clicking softly against the marble, each step a hammer striking Samuel's fragile empire. The whispers grew louder. "She looks stronger than before." "What is happening?" Jennifer did not look at Samuel. Her eyes were fixed ahead, serene, as though she carried the strength of unseen armies. The pastor, bewildered, paused mid-sentence, his gaze flicking between the couple and the approaching woman. But Jennifer was not alone. Just as she reached the halfway point, another figure appeared behind her. Chike, the oil magnate from Port Harcourt, Patricia's former fiancé. His tall frame and commanding presence sent a ripple of recognition through the crowd. He held a folder in his hand, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with restrained fury. Gasps turned into shock. Patricia's knees weakened, her hand trembling violently on Samuel's arm. Chief Adeyemi's face drained of color. Samuel, frozen in disbelief, whispered under his breath, "No, this can't be happening." But it was happening, and there was no stopping it. The cathedral became a stage of reckoning. Chike stepped forward, his voice steady yet heavy with anger. "This wedding cannot continue," he declared, his words booming across the hall. The crowd erupted in murmurs, the atmosphere electric with tension. He opened the folder, pulling out documents, marriage certificates, legal proofs, evidence that Patricia was already married abroad under a different name. Gasps and cries filled the cathedral. Patricia's face turned crimson, her body trembling as whispers pierced her like arrows. "She's already married? Then whose child is she carrying?" The air was thick with judgment, every eye turned on her, every dignitary murmuring in shock. Samuel staggered back, his mind spinning. The world he built on Patricia's promises crumbled like sand in a storm. He looked at her with disbelief, his lips trembling. "Patricia, tell me this isn't true," he whispered, his voice breaking. But Patricia, cornered and humiliated, could not speak. The truth was too heavy. Her father, Chief Adeyemi, turned to her with fury, his face dark, his voice thunderous. "Is this what you brought into my house? Is this the shame you have brought upon my name?" His rage filled the hall, and suddenly, the celebration turned into chaos. Guests began to rise, some slipping out quietly, others whispering about how the Adeyemi name had been stained. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled furiously, their pens recording every detail of the scandal. Jennifer stood silently through it all, her presence dignified. She had not come to expose Patricia. She had come because fate willed her to witness Samuel's undoing. She did not gloat, she did not smile. Instead, she bowed her head quietly, as if in prayer, while the storm raged around her. Samuel, realizing too late the folly of his choices, sank into his chair, his face buried in his palms. Everything he traded Jennifer for, wealth, influence, power, was evaporating before his eyes. And for the first time, he realized he had not just lost Jennifer, he had lost himself. The wedding ended not with hymns and blessings, but with chaos and disgrace. Chief Adeyemi stormed out, dragging Patricia by the arm, his voice ringing with threats and shame. "You are no daughter of mine," he roared, his empire trembling under the weight of scandal. Patricia sobbed, her diamond gown now nothing more than a costume of disgrace. Guests filed out quickly, their laughter gone, replaced with whispers of betrayal. The lavish hall, once filled with glory, now reeked of humiliation. The flowers seemed to wither, the chandeliers dimmed, and the music stopped altogether. The once celebrated event had become a public execution of pride. Samuel sat alone at the altar, abandoned, humiliated. His agbada, once gleaming, felt heavy and suffocating. He replayed the moments in his mind, Jennifer's sacrifices, her prayers, her quiet strength, and for the first time, regret stabbed him deeply. He looked around and saw no friends, no allies, no future. The investors, who had come expecting the promise of an alliance with Chief Adeyemi, had quietly left, shaking their heads. Samuel realized he had not only lost Patricia, but also his career, his reputation, his place in the company. The empire he had dreamed of was ashes before it even began. Jennifer, still standing quietly at the back, turned and walked away. She did not look at Samuel, she did not speak. She carried herself with dignity, her head high, her spirit unbroken. To her, the wedding was not vengeance, it was justice, divine and unseen, unfolding before the world. She left the cathedral not as a discarded wife, but as a woman vindicated by truth. Samuel watched her leave, his eyes filling with tears he could not control. In that moment, he understood the weight of his betrayal and the cost of his ambition. The wedding of the year had ended, but it had ended as a funeral for his pride. When the scandal broke, Lagos could not keep silent. Newspapers plastered headlines that read like epitaphs of Samuel's ambition. Wedding of the year ends in disgrace. Social media turned him into a cautionary tale. Memes of his proud smile at the altar now paired with captions that mocked his downfall. In the office, the atmosphere was no better. Chief Adeyemi, enraged at the humiliation, summoned Samuel to his office one last time. The words were sharp, final, and devastating. "You are finished here. You brought shame into my house and my company. Pack your things." Samuel left the office not as the rising star he had imagined, but as a man exiled from the empire he sold his soul to enter. His colleagues, once envious of his proximity to power, now whispered as he passed, their eyes filled with scorn. Every contract, every opportunity that had seemed within reach dissolved like mist, leaving him with nothing but debts and disgrace. Back in his home, the echo of his failure grew louder. The bills from the wedding, decorators unpaid, foreign florists demanding their balances, designers threatening lawsuits, flooded his table like vultures circling a corpse. Friends who once begged to sit at his table now blocked his calls. Even distant relatives, who had paraded themselves in fine clothes at his wedding, suddenly vanished, muttering excuses when he sought their help. Alone, Samuel sat in the darkness of his living room, staring at the agbada he had worn on the wedding day. Once a garment of pride, now it mocked him, its embroidery a cruel reminder of a glory that had turned to ashes in hours. The sound of his own breathing filled the silence, mingling with the memory of Jennifer's steady gaze as she walked out of the cathedral. That image haunted him more than the disgrace itself, her dignity against his ruin. Each night, he wrestled with his conscience. Sleep eluded him, for dreams brought visions of Jennifer kneeling in prayer, whispering his name in love while he betrayed her. He remembered the nights she stayed awake marking exercise books, the mornings she skipped meals so he could eat, the jewelry she sold so he could pursue his MBA. These memories, once dismissed as trivial, now struck him like arrows of regret. He realized he had traded a crown of peace for a garland of thorns, exchanged a true wife for a deceiver, and lost everything in the bargain. His empire was gone, his career ruined, his pride shattered. He was a man undone, and no one reached out to catch him as he fell. Patricia's world, too, crumbled beneath her diamond-studded heels. When the truth of her secret marriage and pregnancy spilled across Lagos, she became the scandal of high society. Journalists hounded her every step, tabloids feasted on her disgrace, and whispers that once flattered now stabbed. Her father, Chief Adeyemi, withdrew his favor immediately, cutting her off financially and publicly disowning her. The woman who once commanded admiration with a single glance now walked through social circles with bowed head. Her name spat like poison in drawing rooms that once celebrated her. The grandeur she wore so proudly dissolved, leaving her exposed, humiliated, and alone. Her lover, Chike, the oil magnate, distanced himself swiftly. For all his arrogance, even he knew when to abandon a sinking ship. He denied her, claiming she had manipulated him, leaving her to bear the weight of disgrace alone. Friends who once clamored to be seen at her side suddenly turned their backs, their loyalty as shallow as their pockets were deep. Patricia's tears stained the silk pillows of her father's mansion, but soon even that comfort was stripped away. Cast out, she found herself in a smaller apartment, stripped of luxury, stripped of influence, and stripped of the pride that once made her untouchable. Her fall was cruel not because she had sinned, for many sinned, but because she had built her identity entirely on deception and wealth. With those gone, nothing remained. She looked at herself in the mirror one evening, her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen from tears, and whispered, "Who am I now?" But the mirror offered no answer. Patricia's fate was sealed not by Jennifer's presence, nor by Samuel's pride, but by the truth she thought she could bury. The same stage where she once shone brightest had become the place of her deepest disgrace. When pride is broken, a man often crawls back to the place he once despised. Samuel, stripped of honor, with debts mounting and no job to hold on to, found his feet leading him to Jennifer's modest school. He stood at the gate, watching her from a distance, as she dismissed her pupils with a gentle smile, her voice carrying warmth and authority. The children clung to her skirts, their laughter ringing like bells, their admiration painted across their young faces. She had grown more radiant in his absence, her dignity a cloak no disgrace could touch. Samuel's throat tightened as he realized she had flourished without him. He waited until the children were gone before approaching her. "Jennifer," he whispered, his voice trembling. She turned, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of him. He looked nothing like the proud man who had left her. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes dusty, his face gaunt from sleepless nights. He fell to his knees before her, tears streaming freely. "Forgive me," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I was blind. I was foolish. I threw you away for shadows. Please give me another chance." His tears wet the ground, his hands clutching at her gown, as though holding her was the only thing that could save him from drowning. Jennifer looked down at him, her heart stirring with both pity and strength. She remembered the nights she prayed for him, the sacrifices she made, the pain of his betrayal. But she also remembered the strength she had found in God, the peace that had carried her through. Gently, she bent and lifted his hands from her gown. "Samuel," she said softly, her voice calm yet firm, "you did not throw me away. You threw yourself away. I forgive you, but I cannot return to what God has delivered me from." Her words, though tender, struck him like thunder. He wept louder, but she walked away, her dignity intact, her heart free. For forgiveness is not always an invitation to return. Sometimes it is a release that closes a chapter forever. Seasons change, and Jennifer's new season was one of honor. The school board officially confirmed her as headmistress, a role she embraced with humility and grace. Parents gathered to celebrate her, colleagues admired her leadership, and even local leaders began to invite her to speak at educational events. The once forgotten woman became a beacon of resilience, a living testament that dignity, though crushed by betrayal, can rise again stronger than before. She decorated her office modestly, her late mother's Bible placed prominently on her desk, a reminder of the faith that carried her through. Her pupils adored her, writing poems and letters about the teacher who never gave up. In her quiet moments, Jennifer wept, not in sorrow, but in gratitude for how far she had come. Suitors began to notice her. Gentlemen from respectable families approached, drawn to her strength and grace. Some were businessmen, others teachers, but all came with admiration in their eyes. Jennifer, however, was cautious. She was not bitter, but she had learned that love is not about wealth or glamour. It is about truth, loyalty, and sacrifice. She chose not to rush, instead focusing on healing fully and pouring her energy into the children she taught. She believed that if love was meant for her again, it would come in God's time, clothed in honesty and humility. Samuel, watching from the shadows, felt the sting of his choices every time he heard of her achievements. Neighbors whispered of Jennifer's promotion, of her glowing presence, of the men who now admired her. Samuel, once the man who thought he had everything, now had nothing. He lived with regret as his companion, watching the woman he abandoned grow into the woman he could never deserve again. In her rise, his fall became more painful, for every step she climbed was a reminder of the life he could have had if only he had chosen faithfulness. The day of the school's speech and prize-giving ceremony dawned bright and full of promise. Parents, students, and community leaders filled the hall, eager to celebrate the achievements of the children and to hear the words of their beloved headmistress, Jennifer. She stood at the podium, her voice steady, her presence glowing with quiet strength. Dignity, she said, her voice carrying to every corner, is not in what we lose or gain in this world, but in how we choose to stand when life shakes us. Betrayal does not define us. Our response to it does. Pain does not destroy us. It shapes us into vessels of resilience. Let us teach our children that true wealth is not in riches, but in integrity. The hall erupted in applause, parents nodding, children clapping, tears glistening in some eyes. Jennifer smiled, her spirit soaring. She had walked through the fire and come out refined. In the crowd, unnoticed by many, Samuel sat at the back. His clothes were plain, his face worn, his eyes filled with tears that would not stop. Every word Jennifer spoke pierced him like arrows of truth. He realized that this was the woman he had thrown away, the treasure he had dismissed as ordinary. His shoulders shook as he wept silently, not daring to approach, not daring to disrupt her moment. He had once believed himself the victor, but now he knew he was the defeated one, living in the ruins of his pride. When the ceremony ended, Jennifer walked out surrounded by children and well-wishers. Samuel remained in his seat, his head bowed, his heart heavy. He wanted to call her name, to beg one last time, but he knew the answer already. Jennifer was not his to reclaim. She had risen beyond his reach, her dignity sealed by heaven itself. And so, as the hall emptied, Samuel sat alone, his tears his only companion. Jennifer walked away into her future, not with bitterness, but with peace. Her story a testimony that those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.